Hello. So now we're on the last of the papers, or the last one until they do this year's one, and we'll have to come back and do a 2025 one. But for now, we're on 2024 is the last of the papers. Um, the first question, I realized I don't actually have it up. What's the first 10 marker? I had it up. I
This
closed
is
it.
going really well.
Yeah,
Do
this is good
do you
start.
think do we need some kind of music to start? Some kind of official beginning?
I don't know, maybe we can think about that.
We'll figure about it. Okay, anyway.
Yeah, cool. What was the first 10 marker while I open up the paper? Because I accidentally closed it.
Which of the following was of greater importance in the defeat of the British by 1783? Was it was it American unity? Was it French entry into the war?
Cool. You're going to go French, it's French entry into the war now.
Yes.
Do you want to lead off then with your opinion, and then I'll try and counter back with the argument on American unity?
Yeah. Can I start with just a very small digression,
Yes. Yeah.
which
Well,
is that one New Year's Eve, I was in the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe.
mm-hmm.
And there's even a smaller island there's a couple of islands in Guadeloupe, and one of them is called La Sainte.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a massive naval battle,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, just after the uh the this is with Admiral de Grasse. So that this is the
Mm-hmm.
French admiral that briefly won that naval victory.
Is he a national hero as being like the only Frenchman
De Grasse? I don't think
to ever
so.
win a national naval battle against the British? They just constantly kept getting
I don't
kicked.
know, but I just wanted to say that if you read, so there's a museum on La Sainte.
Mhm.
It's a little fort, right? The French
Yeah.
built. And if you go to the museum and you read the history there, the French are absolutely convinced that they were instrumental in winning
Of
the
course
uh
they would
the
be, whatever.
American War of
Even if they
Independence.
weren't, they would be.
So, so,
Yeah.
James, you're a cynic.
Yeah.
So-
You've just been converted because your partner's French now, but like I know how they work. Yeah.
yeah, so exactly. So duty compels me to argue it's French entry into the war.
Yeah, go on.
Um, okay, so um, why do I think this? So can I demolish the American unity argument
Yeah,
first?
go for it. Yeah, because you've got to counter. I mean, that it would be the other way
So
around.
I'm
Do
going to
whichever way you
counter
want. Yeah.
I'm going to do the
Well,
counter.
they've got to dismiss the one. Remember, always in the 10 market, they've got to kind of come up with reasons why it's significant and then destroy it. So the one
Yeah.
they're taking anyway.
So I've got 3 points
Yeah.
against the American unity thesis.
Yeah.
And the first is that many colonists were more loyal to their former colony than to, well, America, right?
Mm.
Which hardly existed. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just kind of confederation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even though and even among the colonies, there were different levels of loyalty. So in Massachusetts, obviously, is quite a radical state, much more so than New York, much more sympathetic to the British, or New Jersey.
No one like
If
Massachusetts.
even no, I know. I'm not gonna. We're already making Massachusetts jokes.
Yes.
Um,
No
so
one likes
and
them now,
Pennsylvania.
but they
So
didn't like them then either.
yeah. So it's not as if It's not as if loyalty was consistent
Mm-hmm.
across the states. Uh, and there were also a number of loyalists, a considerable proportion of them. Was it about one third, James?
Yeah, give or take between
Roughly. I mean, how would you
depends.
know? How would you know? What would your
Well, a
sources
lot of
be?
them were
But
silent loyalists as well, because obviously they could get
yeah,
hard and feathered or their houses burnt down, so they weren't really
yeah.
to tip that. Yeah.
So there were a lot of people much more sympathetic
I
to the
think there was a lot of
British.
people on the fence as well, like you know what I mean, where they were like,
Absolutely.
we'll
Oh,
wait and see
100%.
who's going to win before committing to
Yeah,
it. So,
yeah. And this is interesting too because it's different in the South.
mm,
So in the South, you have these big wig landowners
mm.
who were, supportive of Washington. But there was conflict there with the workers, or
Yeah,
in
and then
some
the
places anyway,
frontiersmen as
who
well.
were more sympathetic to the British. So what American unity? What that's a more complicated term than just saying the you know American colonists were all batting for Washington. So that's my
Yeah.
second point. My third point is that the big factor on the American side is not so much the unity of the different states or of
Mm,
the, but rather the fact that personality of Washington
mm,
was able to keep things together long enough
mm,
to be there
mm.
once the British declared defeat.
Yeah.
So
You're making my
those are my
argument for me, cannibalizing all my points.
yeah, I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are my 3 points
Yeah.
against American unity. I'm going to move on now to my arguments
Yeah.
in favor of the French.
Yeah.
So I think I have two really big points here.
Hmm.
The first one is that the French intervention into the war brings in Spain,
Yeah. And
and
then
then
Holland and then Prussia.
The British are at war with Holland, and they're actually completely isolated, which is
Yeah.
unusual for Britain
Yeah.
geopolitically and very dangerous,
Yeah.
right? Because now it's not just this, arguably insignificant set of colonies. It's not insignificant, but
No, I compare it to like it's
hardly the only interest in the British Empire. Um,
yeah. I try and
and
make I try and make the comparison to my students that the Americans beating the British is like it's like the Vietnam War. And said you've got the
yeah,
global superpower against a guerrilla warfare outfit that no one expects to win and somehow gives a bloody nose. And I said that like if they compare it modern times to the Vietnam War, that's about the closest equivalent I could think of to this.
interesting. I'll have to think about that.
Yeah.
Um, but so obviously Britain's major strength is its navy,
Mm,
right? But now it's facing a big coalition, and even Britain itself is possibly threatened.
mm,
Um, the really important thing for the British is the West Indies.
mm,
So that's where obviously all of the sugar plantations, the tobacco, and all of that is, and that's really I think of sort of primary importance. I think the British colonies or the American colonies are of secondary importance
mm,
for that. So the French intervention, in other words, weakens it necessarily weakens British resolve um,
mm,
in its fight against the rebels.
mm,
So that's one. The second is the really big one. I think this is the most important point, and that is this is why history is really interesting. It's a complete set of freak circumstances.
mm,
Okay, so this is the surrender of Cornwallis in Yorktown.
yeah.
Now, how did that happen? It happened because the Cornwallis didn't have access to reinforcements. He was cut off, and he
Mm.
was cut off because the French Navy, against all odds, managed to defeat the British one time, and
One time in their life, it happens
it's
to be
called
at a
one
very
time,
fundamental moment. Yeah.
at absolutely critical moment, and this is called the Battle of the Chesapeake.
Yeah.
Um, and they hold off so that in that battle they were able to drive off the British long enough to assist to support the Americans, and Cornwallis surrenders.
Yeah.
Now, even that battle in itself might not have been decisive, but like to be honest, I think that the most important factor is not American unity and not even French entry, but it's actually British determination.
Yeah. But that's not a fact in this
But
question.
that's not a factor. That's not a factor. But
Yeah. Yeah.
even if it was, I think that the
Yeah.
French entry is really the decisive point in relation
Yeah.
to British determination, and Cornwallis's surrender is sort of I think it's is it what you'd say, the straw that breaks the camel's back?
Yeah.
It's just the last straw.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's my
Yeah, and
sorry,
Pete's
there's
been
a lot of
arguing they
like
can't win anyway for a while. And I agree, like, yeah, from my side, okay, I can I say like, yeah, I agree. French entry to the war swings it mainly because it puts the British Empire under enormous strain. And like you said, the Caribbean, West Indies is the most profitable part of the British Empire. They're in danger of losing that. The Navy's set up to beat the best and the second and third best navies in the world because in case they unify, but it's not equipped and couldn't be equipped to fight every navy in the world. I mean, they're against every maritime power and every land power. Even the Prussians aren't on our side. So like, I don't know about Portugal. Maybe Portugal's always been loyal to the British. I don't know whose side they were on in that one, but like, we literally had it was a pylon. I think everyone wanted revenge on
Yeah.
the Britain for the Seven Years' War, and they saw this as an opportunity. And obviously another thing, they gave them ships, guns, supplies. Without the ammunition, without the war, they wouldn't have been able to do it. But I think that the fact the British Empire just gets so stretched, and in the end they realize that they can't win this, and they certainly can't fight. They need to basically they need to concentrate their forces on beating the French, so they don't have enough to fight the Americans anymore. But so I acknowledge, I would argue that French entry into the war only accelerated the end of the war. I think British defeat was already inevitable anyway. And that the
Mhm.
French, yes, the French entry accelerated it, but I don't think it led to, I suppose by 1783 is the question. So yes, I don't know. It might well have lasted longer without French entry. So the key is the date, thinking back and looking at it now. I think America would have won anyway. And I think American unity was vitally important for that. One, because I don't think the French would have entered without Saratoga. And I don't think Saratoga happens without American unity. I think Washington holding the army together was fundamental. I think if he'd been taken at Long Island, I think they may have knocked them out of the war. Because America didn't need to win the war.
Yeah.
America didn't need to win the war. They just have to not give in. And the only thing stopping them not giving in is they have to surrender. They have to give in. They can't be beaten in a conventional.
Yeah. What do you think would have happened if Washington had been defeated later in the war?
Later in the war,
Mm.
after Gates wins in Saratoga,
Yeah.
well, then they had a ready-made general. I think Gates could have taken over. Maybe
Think
Benedict
it
Arnold would have been made general and not become a traitor. And he would be the first
maybe.
president of America instead of the greatest
Maybe.
villain in American history.
Maybe.
They still had Nathaniel Greene. They had good generals. And Washington wasn't the best general. He was the best unifier. Would they have hung on
But
later on? How later? Because like by that point the British were in trouble anyway. I guess if Cornwallis's southern campaign had worked, maybe. But I still think there was unity. Yeah, you're right. It was disunited. Like Native Americans weren't on their side, African Americans weren't on their side, lots of loyalists weren't on their side. But again, they didn't need these people. They just needed to unify the ones who were fighting their cause. And I think Washington's victory at Trenton and at Princeton helped unify. I think having a rallying figure is important because remember they lost their capital. They took Philadelphia and they stayed
right.
in war. And I think also like I mean it is true British weakness contribute to a lot of this, but it's not a factor. It doesn't really matter here. But like, when Burgoyne, our good old friend, Gentleman Johnny, was marching south with his piano, he did use the Native Americans and killed Jane McCrae, which led to a rallying call
Yes, that's right.
to the American side. So that did unify. I mean, I think the fear of, I mean, the British kind of helped unify the Americans because by using the Native Americans and Hessian foreign troops against them, and by siding with the Quebecois, and by promising to free the African Americans, they basically unified all what the white Anglo-Saxon Americans would have considered un-Americans. So the British rallied the un-Americans in America
Yeah.
to the cause, which helped unify the Americans into a force, I think.
But
And
I
that,
guess, I mean, there's a certain ambiguity in what it means by American unity
yeah,
because look at Washington's army.
yeah,
It's only at a certain points, there's only about 2,500 men there,
yeah.
right?
Well, but the
I
militia. I
mean,
mean, he's got the militia.
it's got the militia. So to what extent does that
Well, it's
mean
like the
American
early period
unity?
of the Americans. The Americans
So
love a winner. Winning unifies. So for at least until the Civil War
yeah,
comes to liberalism and then the initial government. I mean, yeah, America is never unified. But the
no,
unity it does, and there's divisions between the North and the South, divisions between the rural. But I think they put that aside-ish in the war, and those come to the fore when they have to form a government afterwards, because they don't really have an idea of what a unified country is going to look like. But I think the British do enough to annoy them. I think the British make enough mistakes that it temporarily unifies the Americans in the chorus. And they did all believe the British government was tyrannical. They did all believe in no taxation without representation. That did, the ideological argument was there. And, they did unify in the Continental Congresses. They came in behind Massachusetts, even though no one likes Massachusetts, because Virginia sided with them. And the moment you've got Virginia and Massachusetts, they're the most important colony in the North, the most important colony in the South. I mean, if the British can do such a job to unify those two, they end up in like nearly 100 years later, fighting a civil war. That's how many mistakes the British made in terms of keeping the Americans unified.
Okay.
But I think
And
that those divisions
yeah.
manifest themselves more once they win the war than during the war in terms of
Well, I was going to say it's also you could say that the American unity is a certain retrospective take on this, from a patriotic perspective.
yeah, but
It's
that's
it's
America.
tempting
That's what
it's
they do.
tempting to see this conflict as, us versus them,
Yeah,
and
well, that's all.
obviously
Yeah, that's
they
always what they've
forget
done.
about the fact that there's no federal government. Right? There's
Yeah,
just the colonies,
yeah,
and the colonies are different.
that is
So,
definitely their way. I'm not going to deny that. Like they rewrite their history constantly outside of stuff. But I'm thinking,
well, everybody does, not just the America. I mean, it's not
no,
to
but I think the
blame
Americans
anybody.
do it more than anyone. The
Oh, well, yeah,
I
okay.
think the British are just bullishly don't care. So like I think the British ignore their negative history. I don't think they rewrite it. The Americans, the French don't enter the war without Saratoga. Saratoga doesn't happen without American unity.
Yeah,
Would be my key argument. I think
okay.
that the French don't enter until they see the Americans can win this, and they're only going to win if they're unified to a certain extent. I mean, you could do like Gates wanted Washington's job. I mean, he was canvassing for Washington's job
Yeah.
after Saratoga.
Okay.
So there was
Yeah.
disunity even in leadership. But I think, yes, was there American unity? No, but I think what unity there was still
Was
more
enough.
was
Yeah.
enough to get the French in. I believe the French accelerated it. So if you're going by 1783, would they have won it that fast without French entry? Probably not. So actually, with the question being by 1783, probably French entry into the war was most important for accelerating it. If it was just in the defeat of the British, I would say American
Yeah.
unity, but because it's by
But
1783, that
it's
makes
important it's important to say as well in relation to French entry. So I'm going to side
yeah,
give you some more slightly more a bit more ammunition to
yeah.
use
On
against
my
me
side or for French entry.
for French entry, which
Where I
is
go.
which is in fact um uh, the French entered the war, but they're not very successful.
Yeah.
I mean, there's several major failures.
Wow, that's it wouldn't
Failure
be the
to
French without them. There you go. Go
James,
on.
I'm not allowed to say things like that, and so I'm going to keep my mouth shut. So failure, they, they tried to land an expedition against Savannah. It's in
Yeah.
Georgia, and they don't manage to do that. It's really this victory at this really one critical point. It's actually interesting as they have Lafayette. Did you
Yeah.
see Lafayette in the musical
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Hamilton?
Hmm.
Do you know what French historians describe Lafayette as?
They probably
This
don't
was
like
in
him because he was wasn't he part of Robespierre's like French Revolutionary side as well?
Well, Lafayette has an interesting story
He's
in
on the
relation
wrong
to the French
side in the end,
Revolution.
isn't he, on the French
They call
French Revolution?
they call Lafayette a quote empty-headed political dwarf.
Yeah. 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 Because he was on the
So,
losing side in the end, wasn't he, overall in the French
well,
Revolution?
and it's actually weird because you can imagine from the French perspective, this
Yeah.
is this is Louis the 16th,
Yeah.
correct?
Mm. My
That
French history is not good. I
which
wouldn't
which
know.
I think it is.
Mm.
I don't think Louis is all that keen on this revolution business.
Well,
So there's an interesting tension in the French policy because um, supporting supporting these revolutionaries against a monarchy
mm,
is a little dangerous.
yeah.
On the other hand,
Especially when you're
whatever,
bankrupting your country to fight the war, so you run out of money.
absolutely, and yes, and in fact, the bank we're going far afield now, so I'm
Yeah, we're
sorry,
going into the French Revolution
students.
course that we will do eventually.
Sorry, students of James.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. So just from the French perspective, there's a kind of clash of there's a tension. On the
Mm,
one hand, stick it to the British whenever you can.
mm.
Right? So if you can damage them, harm your perennial enemy, so much the better. But
It's
on the other
revenge as
hand,
well. It was revenge for the 7 Years' War.
revenge, absolutely,
Yeah,
opportunism.
yeah,
But on the other hand, ideologically, it's a little dicey,
yeah,
right? Supporting rebels against I guess the rightful monarchy.
yeah.
So I'm sure that wasn't lost
But
on
he was not. He was
many
not a
peoples.
powerful intellect as a king, from what little I know.
Um,
He made a lot of
Louis the
errors himself.
16th.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. But anyway, that's another story. So okay. So have we?
Yes, we kind of concluded that the 1783 part might well make it French entry that's more important.
I
But yeah,
think it's probably slightly easier to say French entry.
without the date, I'd have gone for American unity. But with the date, I'm
Yeah.
not sure American unity alone would have ended it by that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
That's the
Good
key thing.
point. And that's actually just a reminder to the
Yeah,
students.
yeah.
Something really
To look
important
at the
to keep in
questions.
mind is to when you read the question,
Yeah,
look at the date
yeah,
because the date might change the answer.
yeah, for sure.
Right.
I,
Imagine if it said 1780 or 1779.
well, they only just come
Sorry,
in.
it was 17 then be a bit
If it
different.
didn't have a date, then it's just then because the thing is when it has a date, the date becomes significant because it's like
Yeah.
why did they do it by this date and not any other time? And that's earlier, so it has to be because it's
Yeah.
like Peace of Paris is after Yorktown. Whereas if it
That's
just
right.
says defeat, the thing is if there's a date, the date becomes the most significant point. If it says by
That's
a
right.
certain date, whereas if there's no date, then it's just the action, and that's a really different question.
Indeed. And probably, I mean, I imagine you tell your students this, but definitely practice writing timelines so you know the dates of these main events.
Yeah.
That's going to be
I
helpful.
don't because I've
You
always been
don't?
I've always been shit with dates myself. I just know when I know the big ones and when things come in. But yeah, you need to know the core dates. They need it for Churchill more. When we do Churchill next week, you'll see like they need the dates for that much more than the other ones.
All right. So shall we
Yeah. So
skip on
how
to
successful was the Bill of Rights in doing stuff?
yeah,
So I think these two essays both lend themselves to two-sided essays. I think where you do is was it
yeah,
successful, was it not? Because I think it'd be really hard to break into factors on the Bill of Rights because
yeah,
I don't see. I mean, fundamentally, this is a tough question. I think because it's dealing with the early republic's problems. Um, Obviously, I would say you can make the case either way. I'll probably do a little summary of it, and then you can jump in and say. I would say fundamentally the most important thing about the Bill of Rights is the Constitution doesn't get ratified without it. So, so I think you can link it to the Constitution itself because so how important was the Constitution in dealing with? So you can take that essay about Constitution and how successful was it dealing with the early republics under Washington. You can do it, but you'd have to base it out of the Bill of Rights because literally, I think and we'll deal with that in the Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. I don't think the states ratify it without the Bill of Rights. I think the fear of tyranny was too strong. The fear of a centralized government was too strong. The fear that the constitution they'd created was going to be too powerful and the president was going to become a new king was too strong. And Madison's genius, and what makes Madison a genius, is that he is not only did he help write the Federalist Papers and help design the Constitution in the first place. He basically helped design the most important argument on the Federalist side and the most important like placating thing to the anti-Federalists, which is quite a spectacular piece of work, I think. And like the fact that each of the amendments gives them, without it, they wouldn't have the Constitution. Without the Constitution, there would have been no ability to tax and no ability to raise tariffs, which meant they wouldn't have been able to deal with all the financial crisis they were facing. Hamilton wouldn't have been able to set up his banking system. They wouldn't have been able to raise an army, in which case they wouldn't have been able to put down the Whiskey Rebellion. They'd have been in further problems. I think they wouldn't have been able to get the Jay Treaty and Pinckney Treaty through. Basically, I don't think the government would have been fundamentally able to work at all without the Bill of Rights. I think it is that important a document. Like a lot of the anti-federalists or the ones who were swayed onto the federalist side basically cite that. The fact that the Bill of Rights deals with the 10 amendments are basically dealing with everything that they were afraid. Everything the British had done to them between 1763 and 1776, they made a specific amendment to make sure that couldn't happen. And I think that that is fundamentally really important. Um, in terms of arguing why it's not successful, I mean, looking at our later courses, if you're looking just 1791 to 96, it's a bit different. Doesn't deal with slavery, um, doesn't address I mean, the Bill of Rights doesn't really apply to everyone until the 14th Amendment's brought in. It's not clear who exactly has these rights. So the fact that, like some of my students argued, women don't have these rights, African Americans don't have these rights, Native Americans aren't included in the Bill of Rights means a lot of the problems of the North-South divide and slavery, anti-slavery, and westward expansion are still there. But how much that really impacts 1791 to 1796, I don't know. I think that the fundamental flaws in the Bill of Rights manifest themselves much later in the 19th century than they do in the early period. And
Okay.
I think that the other divisions that aren't dealt with, I don't think the Bill of Rights is able to deal with slavery. I don't think it's able to deal with economic differences in the North and the South. I don't think it's able to deal with a lot of the divisions in America, but that wasn't really what it was supposed to do. It dealt with the most fundamental division that was going to stop the Constitution being ratified, which is Federalists versus Anti-Federalists, and it dealt with that. Does it deal with any of the other things? Not really. And the 10th Amendment goes on to cause a lot of problems for America in the future when they put states' rights over federal. And there's still arguments this day. I mean, look at Roe v. Wade and Dobbs. Even right now, they're still arguing over the 10th Amendment, 10th versus 14th. What do you think?
I'll put my. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay. Yeah. So I had a similar, I guess, a similar version of your argument. My
yeah,
my argument is, well, it was successful in resolving one critical problem
yeah.
or helping resolve one critical
The
problem.
critical problem. So if
Well,
you,
yeah, but I'm just not sure. I don't actually don't know enough to know whether it was the Bill of Rights was absolutely fundamental or whether it contributed among a set of other factors.
yeah,
But be that as it may, it's still very important because in order for there to be consensus, necessary consensus on the new federal government, right, to ratify this new constitution, um, the states that are wavering, who are worried about losing their say their states their state power, state authority. These are people who are worried that the rights that they enjoy in their states are going to be completely subsumed and sucked up by this new kind of colossal federal government,
mm,
correct?
yeah,
And so the Bill of Rights was designed um, to allay those fears,
mm,
right? To give some kind of reassurance
yeah,
that the states' rights would be pr fully protected
yeah,
by the Constitution. I remember reading there was some debate about this, I think between
yeah,
Madison and Hamilton in particular, because
yeah.
Hamilton thought that, correct me if I'm wrong, but from memory, Hamilton thought that these amendments were in fact implied in the Constitution itself and that there was no need to have a separate Bill of Rights.
But Hamilton
But
wasn't
that's
interested.
Hamilton.
Hamilton wasn't
So,
interested in states' rights, so I'm pretty sure he would have loved. Hamilton would have loved not to have the 10th
so
Amendment.
maybe, yeah. So maybe it was a disingenuous argument. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, so yeah,
I think he would have
okay.
liked to not have something tying his hands down, just considering he was a big advocate for the imperial presidency.
Yeah. So, and as you pointed out, James, the 10 amendments are essentially modeled on what, so-called British despotism, right? Um,
Well,
in
I'd
the
say
lead up
eight of
to
them
the
are. Nine
War of
and 10 are
Independence.
more to placate the other side. 9 and 10 are the problematic ones.
Pardon me.
1 to 8 is not really a
Yeah,
problem. 9 and 10 is
yeah,
a problem.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But things so look at the Third Amendment.
Yeah.
It's prohibited prohibited is the quartering of troops on
Yeah.
civilians.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in the territory of the intolerable acts,
Yeah.
right? Um, and okay, so uh, yeah, so that was
But how much do these things
yeah.
really deal with? The key is those ones. How much are they really dealing with um, the problems of 1791 to 96. That Washington's not trying to put soldiers in people's houses. So like I don't, you know what I mean? I don't think it matters.
No, but I think it's there to
Yeah, that's what I
reassure
mean. As in for like the
advocates of
practical, what it does doesn't really do much. I think it's more the real.
no, that's right. So for example, I mean, I don't think that there was any question that troops would be quartered on civilians,
No.
no, in 1791. But it's important, it was thought important to have the amendment there as a reminder. Um,
Mm.
so okay, so in other words, very either instrumental or extremely important in cementing sufficient support to ratify the Constitution, right? By quelling the fears from states' rights advocates and reassuring them that they would maintain sort of most or all of the rights that they currently enjoy under their state constitutions.
Yeah.
Um, the second part of the question is everything else, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
obviously there's a whole bunch of problems going on. It's not just ratifying the Constitution, although that's a major one.
Yeah, but I think without the
Um,
Constitution, they don't deal with those other problems. As if
I
it's like
Yeah,
something
it's a
that
kind of
solves them
sine
and
qua
all.
non. Yeah, okay, no, that's right. So it's significant,
Because
but
the Articles of Confederation was not solving any of these problems, that's for sure.
no, no. So what are the problems though in
Mm.
1791 to 1796?
Mm.
That's I guess implied in the question,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's what the slavery thing makes it a bit tricky, right? I guess you could say that because the Ten Amendments they don't say anything about
No, and it kicks the can down
slavery,
the road and eventually leads to the Civil War. So they don't deal with it. It's not a
but in
pressing issue in those
but
first 5 years, but
I
it
think
becomes one.
in that time frame between
Mm.
1791 and 1796, there
Mm.
isn't really a lot of friction about that question yet.
A little bit they did because
The
there was still a debate on three-fifths, like the three-fifths clause in the
Sure,
Constitution ratification, and like some of the
sure.
northern states like Pennsylvania are starting to move towards abolitionism. But even like at the time of the ratification, the Constitution, New York was still a slave state, so like there was still a few.
Indeed. That's my point.
Yeah,
Okay. So there's a big problem with debt.
yeah,
And so that's one of the
yeah,
um, major problems facing the new republic after the War of Independence. Now, arguably, the Constitution helps solve that
yeah,
problem once you have the federal government.
yeah.
And
Taxation, tariffs.
since the Bill of Rights was instrumental
Yeah,
in allowing that to happen, then you could say arguably
yeah,
indirectly it
yeah.
helps solve the problem. But I don't think there's nothing in the Bill of Rights itself, I think,
No.
that helps
No, I don't
helps
think the Bill of Rights itself
with the
solves
debt.
any problems. In fact, with the 10th Amendment, probably makes things worse in the long run. The thing is, I think it's like the key argument is without it, there's no constitution. Without the constitution, these problems aren't solved.
Yeah. I actually the Fourth Amendment
Yeah.
is interesting from the point of view of slavery.
Mm,
Prohibited unreasonable searches and seizure of property.
mm.
So that's going to become quite important when the fugitive slave laws um,
Yeah. Although they
are
don't,
enforced later.
yeah, they don't get fully labeled as property until Dred Scott.
Right. No, but
Yeah.
it's no, that's right. So it's not again, it's not
Yeah.
between 1791 and 1796,
Yeah.
not a big problem. But
Mm.
there are the seeds for conflict
Yeah.
down the road. I mean, we're talking when things really heat up, we're talking, you know, I guess between the sort of from the 1830s, 1840s onwards.
Yeah. Yeah. When it really
And
kicks.
as each, as new states enter the Union,
Mm.
then the tension builds up.
Yeah, I think the
But we're not there yet.
Mexican
Yeah,
American War really, really ramps it up.
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so that sounds all right, I think. Um, Anything else to add?
No, and I think, like I said, I think it deals with their ability to. They get the army, so they can put down the military. Ironically, the Second Amendment's like, yeah, you have the right to guns, but if you use them defending yourself in the Whiskey Rebellion, we'll crush you with the army. So it's like outside. So I don't know. I think it gets those federal ratifications, but I think that I mean, states' rights is still cited today. Fundamentally, states' rights arguments are massively important. Like I said, Dobbs, Roe v. Wade doesn't get overturned without the 10th Amendment. So
Yeah,
like how vital
absolutely.
this is to America, both in terms of unity and division.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what makes America such a in some ways such a peculiar place
Yeah,
when you compare it to the parliamentary democracies like Australia or Britain.
yeah,
That these sorts of constitutional issues are really absent, I think. Absent I mean, not completely absent,
yeah,
um, but certainly not not at the forefront as it is in the United States to this day, right? And
yeah.
presumably, as Trump's presidency unfolds, there'll be states that will assert their state rights
Yeah, it'll
against
be
the federal
Democrat
government.
states this time. It just depends who's the president. It'll be the states on the
Yeah,
opposite side to the presidency. So when he
yeah,
starts doing
yeah,
his like deportation orders, I can see like
that's right.
California and that being like, we're not going to follow it. Like,
Yeah, 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 that's right. So, okay, anyway,
yeah. Yeah. So
that's
do we
so
agree
much for
that
that.
it's vitally important in not in and of itself, but because of what it allows to happen?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
agree.
No, cool. Let's finish on that one because we can end this one and then we can call for the next one.
Just a quick question,
Oh, yeah.
James.
Yeah.
So if you look at the Seventh Amendment, it
Yeah.
says right to jury trial in civil disputes involving over $20.
Yeah.
Did they amend that amendment?
With
$20
inflation,
isn't
with
very much.
inflation. I don't
Yeah.
know. Let's check. Did the seventh
What would $20 have been in those days? It would have been quite a lot of
quite a
money.
lot of money, yeah. Change with inflation. Let's see. Or is it still $20? No, it's still about it still apparently is relevant. That's relevant. That's $480 today. So it's still not, to be
Okay.
honest, it's not a massive difference. But they're like,
No.
no, they're like it because they didn't put in it says they haven't adjusted it because they didn't put in the Constitution. It's supposed to be adjusted with inflation.
So if
So
you,
it stayed at $20. Because of course,
yeah.
strict constitutionalists. It's like, no, the founding fathers couldn't possibly have made that oversight.
But so if I lend you $20, $25,
Yeah,
and you don't give it back to
yeah,
me,
jury trial.
jury trial.
Yeah.
We're on to Judge Judy.
Well, to be fair, do you think lawyers are going to want to amend that? The Constitution is a nice money stream for them.
True, true.
Yeah. And
Okay.
yeah, they
All
haven't.
right.
Yeah, no, there was no provision in the Constitution made for inflation.
No, I
I
imagine
guess.
they would have known that.
I guess
Yeah.
Hamilton didn't write that
So
part of the Constitution. He would have been all over
I think
that.
so. All right, we're off on a giant tangent.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah. But
yeah.
it is quite funny. Like, and it is interesting to know to look up the Seventh Amendment hasn't actually changed. It is still $20. Yeah. All right, cool. Let's do the second part of the paper then. Let's end this.
Okay.